Marcus Westfield stood over his wife's hospital bed, his voice cold as ice. "You killed our children." The words hung in the air like a death sentence as Charlotte's heart monitor beeped frantically. But 6 months later, when a mysterious envelope arrived at his billion-dollar empire, the truth inside would bring the most powerful man in New York to his knees. What he discovered would destroy everything he thought he knew about that tragic night. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. The crystal chandelier in the Westfield Tower penthouse cast prismatic rainbows across the Italian marble floors, but Charlotte Westfield barely noticed the beauty anymore. At 28 weeks pregnant with quadruplets, every movement felt like carrying the weight of the world. She placed one hand on her swollen belly, feeling the gentle kicks of 4 tiny lives, and smiled despite the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. "Mrs. Westfield, your car is ready downstairs," her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Charlotte glanced at her Cartier watch, 2:15. Her appointment with Dr. Richard Ashford was at 3 o'clock, and Manhattan traffic was unpredictable even for the wife of Marcus Westfield, the real estate magnate whose name graced half the luxury buildings in the city. She grabbed her Hermes bag, double-checked that she had her prenatal vitamins, the special ones Dr. Ashford had prescribed just for her high-risk pregnancy, and headed for the private elevator that serviced only the penthouse floors. The elevator doors slid open with their customary whisper-quiet precision. Charlotte stepped inside the glass and chrome sanctuary, pressing the button for the lobby 43 floors below. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. Despite the pregnancy glow everyone talked about, she looked tired. The quadruplets were a blessing. IVF had given her and Marcus the family they dreamed of, but the pregnancy was taking its toll. The elevator descended smoothly for the first few seconds. Then came the grinding sound. It started as a subtle screech of metal on metal, barely noticeable. Charlotte frowned, her hand instinctively moving to her belly in a protective gesture. The elevator jerked once, twice, then shuddered violently. The lights flickered. Her heart began to race as the descent suddenly accelerated, the sensation of freefall making her stomach lurch. "No, no, no," she whispered, hitting the emergency button repeatedly. Nothing. The elevator was falling, truly falling, and through the glass panels she could see the floors whipping past in a blur. Charlotte's scream filled the small space as she braced herself against the wall. She wrapped both arms around her belly, as if she could somehow shield her bobbies from the impact she knew was coming. Time seemed to slow and speed up simultaneously. She saw her life flash before her eyes, her wedding day, Marcus's smile, the ultrasound image showing 4 tiny heartbeats, the nursery they just finished painting in soft yellows and greens. The impact came at the 29th floor. The emergency brakes engaged with a horrific screech of grinding metal and sparks, but not before the elevator had plummeted 13 floors at near freefall speed. The sudden deceleration threw Charlotte against the back wall with crushing force. Her head cracked against the mirror. Pain exploded through her abdomen, sharp and terrible and wrong in ways that made her soul scream. When the elevator finally shuddered to a complete stop, wedged between floors, Charlotte slid to the ground. She was aware of warm wetness spreading beneath her. Blood. Too much blood. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her belly, trying to feel movement, any movement at all. "Please," she sobbed, "please, my bobbies, please." But she already knew. In her heart, in the way her body was failing, in the silence where there should have been kicks and rolls, she already knew. The next hours blurred together in a nightmare of emergency responders. The fire department prying open the elevator doors, paramedics carefully extracting her onto a stretcher. She remembered the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor, the grave faces of doctors and nurses, and then Marcus's face, pale and shocked, appearing above her as they wheeled her into emergency surgery. "Marcus," she whispered, reaching for him, needing to feel his hand in hers as their world collapsed. But his expression stopped her cold. It wasn't just shock she saw there, it was something else, something harder. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold in a way she'd never seen before. "Sir, you can't go in. A nurse tried to stop him as they approached the operating room doors. Marcus pushed past her, his 6'3" frame radiating fury. He leaned down close to Charlotte's face, and she smelled the expensive cologne she'd bought him for Christmas. His next words would echo in her nightmares for months to come. "What did you do, Charlotte? What the hell did you do?" I don't," she stammered, confused, terrified, bleeding. "The elevator. Dr. Ashford already called me. He said you missed your last 2 appointments, said you'd been acting erratically. Were you drinking?" His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Were you drinking while you carried my children?" "No, Marcus, I would never." "We'll find out. They're going to test your blood." He straightened up, his face a mask of controlled rage. "If you did this, if you killed our Bobbies through your own stupidity." "Mr. Westfield, you need to leave now," the lead surgeon pushed him back. "We're losing her, G.O." The doors swung shut, cutting off Marcus's face. Charlotte closed her eyes as tears streamed down her temples. The last thing she heard before the anesthesia took her was the rapid-fire beeping of her heart monitor and the surgeon's urgent voice. "We've lost all 4 fetal heartbeats. This is now a maternal life-saving procedure." When Charlotte woke up, her belly was flat, empty. The silence inside her was deafening. A nurse with kind eyes appeared at her bedside. "Mrs. Westfield, you're at Mount Sinai Hospital. You've been in recovery for 6 hours. The surgery went as well as could be expected, but—" She paused, struggling with her professional composure. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "My Bobbies," Charlotte's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." The wail that tore from Charlotte's throat was inhuman. It was the sound of a mother's heart breaking into a million pieces, each shard cutting deeper than the last. Nurses rushed in. Someone injected something into her IV. The world went fuzzy at the edges, but the pain remained sharp and clear in the center of her chest. Over the next 3 days, as her body slowly healed from the surgery, Charlotte existed in a fog of grief. Marcus didn't visit. Not once. Her calls to his cell went straight to voicemail. When she finally convinced a sympathetic nurse to try calling the penthouse, the housekeeper told her that Mr. Westfield had instructed staff that his wife was not to be allowed back into the building. On the 4th day, Marcus's lawyer arrived instead. Gerald Rothstein was a shark in an Armani suit, a man who made his millions protecting billionaires from their mistakes. He set his briefcase on the wheeled table over Charlotte's hospital bed with a crisp snap. "Mrs. Westfield, I'm here on behalf of my client, Marcus Westfield." "I want to see my husband," Charlotte said, her voice still raw from crying. "That won't be possible. Mr. Westfield has instructed me to inform you that he is filing for divorce. The papers will be served once you're discharged." Rothstein pulled out a folder. "Furthermore, your blood work came back with trace amounts of alcohol. Combined with the missed medical appointments and Dr. Richard Ashford's testimony regarding your unreliable behavior, we have substantial evidence that your negligence directly contributed to the death of the 4 Westfield heirs." Charlotte felt like she'd been struck. "That's not true. I never drank, not once during the pregnancy. I don't understand." "Dr. Ashford has provided a detailed statement. You missed appointments. You were seen at a charity gala with a champagne glass. You refused to follow his medical advice regarding bed rest." Each accusation landed like a hammer blow. "That's a lie. The glass was sparkling cider. Dr. Ashford never prescribed bed rest. He told me light activity was important." Charlotte's heart monitor began beeping frantically. "Please, you have to let me talk to Marcus. This is wrong. This is all wrong. Mr. Westfield wants nothing to do with you." Rothstein's voice was clinical, detached. "You will receive nothing in the divorce. Your prenuptial agreement specifies that in cases of proven adultery, substance abuse, or, and I quote, reckless behavior resulting in harm to potential Westfield heirs, you forfeit all rights to marital assets, property, and alimony." "But I didn't." The room was spinning. "This couldn't be happening. It couldn't." "You killed his children, Mrs. Westfield. Consider yourself fortunate that he's chosen not to pursue criminal negligence charges." Rothstein snapped his briefcase closed. "You have 72 hours to remove your personal effects from the penthouse, supervised by security. Choose the time wisely. Mr. Westfield will not be present." He left without another word. Charlotte sat in the hospital bed, staring at the wall where they'd hung a generic print of a sunset. She'd lost 4 Bobbies. She'd lost her husband. She'd lost her home, her life, her identity. And according to everyone who mattered, according to Marcus, to Dr. Ashford, to the lawyers and the blood tests and the whispered rumors that were already circulating through Manhattan's elite circles, it was all her fault. But deep in her gut, beneath the grief and shock and trauma, a small voice whispered something that would keep her alive through the dark months to come. Something was wrong, something about that elevator, something about the timing, something about Dr. Ashford's suddenly convenient testimony. She didn't know what, but she would find out, even if it took her the rest of her life. 6 months later, Charlotte Westfield, though she'd legally returned to her maiden name, Charlotte Morrison, sat in a cramped studio apartment in Washington Heights, staring at a laptop screen that showed Marcus's smiling face. He was at another charity gala, his arm around the waist of Veronica Hastings, a 24-year-old model actress whose Instagram followers numbered in the millions. "Manhattan's most eligible bachelor returns to the scene," the headline proclaimed. The article gushed about Marcus's recovery from his tragic loss and praised him for his strength in moving forward after his unstable wife's negligence had cost him his children and nearly his reputation. Charlotte closed the laptop before she threw it across the room. The studio apartment was a far cry from the penthouse. 400 square feet of peeling paint, a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, and a bathroom where the hot water worked only between 6 and 8 in the morning. She'd taken a job as a freelance bookkeeper, working remotely for small businesses who didn't care about her scandalous past. The pay barely covered rent and groceries. She'd stopped reading the comments on social media weeks ago. The court of public opinion had judged her swiftly and mercilessly. Reckless mother, gold digger who killed her own Bobbies for attention, alcoholic socialite who threw away everything. Dr. Ashford's expert testimony in the divorce proceedings had been leaked to Page 6. Marcus's team had painted her as unstable, irresponsible, unfit. No one had asked for her side of the story. Her few friends from the society circuit had vanished the moment the scandal broke. Her phone number had been changed 3 times to stop the death threats. She'd lost 12 pounds from stress and lived on ramen noodles and cheap coffee. The only thing that kept her going was the tiny flame of truth burning in her chest. She knew what she'd experienced that day. The elevator had failed catastrophically. She had not been drinking. She had not missed her appointments. She had her calendar to prove it, though no one would listen. And Dr. Ashford's claims about her behavior didn't match reality. But who would believe the disgraced ex-wife of Marcus Westfield over a renowned Park Avenue physician, with 30 years of impeccable credentials? Charlotte pulled out her worn notebook, the one she'd filled with details she could remember from that day and the months leading up to it. She'd been over it 1,000 times. Black circle. The elevator made a sound before it fell, deliberate, like something releasing, not breaking. Black circle. Dr. Ashford had switched her prenatal vitamins 3 months into the pregnancy, saying the standard ones weren't sufficient for quadruplets. Black circle. The blood test showing alcohol had been taken while she was sedated. She had no memory of consenting to it or being told about the results until the lawyer showed up. Black circle. Witnesses at the gala had seen her with sparkling cider, could testify she drank nothing alcoholic, but they'd all disappeared when subpoenaed, suddenly unable to recall. Every lead she tried to chase had hit a wall. The building's maintenance records for the elevator were sealed by Westfield Corporation's lawyers. The elevator company had settled with Marcus out of court, signing NDAs. The hospital refused to discuss her case, citing patient privacy while simultaneously allowing Dr. Ashford to make public statements. She was one powerless woman against an empire. But she wouldn't stop trying. Charlotte opened her laptop again, pulling up the document she'd been compiling, a timeline of everything suspicious, every inconsistency, every question that kept her awake at night. She added today's date and a new entry: Marcus at gala with new girlfriend, 6 months to the day after the elevator. Public narrative fully established. Charlotte Morrison equals villain. Case closed. Her phone buzzed. A text from her therapist, Dr. Sandra Chen, one of the few people who believed her story. Remember, healing isn't about convincing others of the truth. It's about surviving. You're stronger than you know. Charlotte typed back, "Thank you, some days I don't feel strong at all." "That's when you're being strongest," came the immediate reply. Charlotte set the phone down and walked to the window. From her sixth-floor apartment, she could see a sliver of the Hudson River between buildings. It wasn't much, but it was hers. This tiny, humble space was the first thing in 6 months that belonged to her and her alone. She thought about her bobbies. Not a day passed without thinking about them. 4 little souls she'd never gotten to meet. 2 boys and 2 girls according to the last ultrasound. She'd named them in her heart: Emma, Lucas, Sophie, and James. Sometimes late at night, she let herself imagine what they would have looked like, what their first words might have been, how their laughter would have filled the penthouse that was no longer her home. The grief was a constant weight, but it had transformed over these months. The raw, bleeding wound had scabbed over into something harder: determination, a need for justice that went beyond personal vindication. If someone had sabotaged that elevator, they'd gotten away with murdering 4 innocent lives. That couldn't stand. Charlotte returned to her laptop and opened a new browser window. She'd already contacted 3 private investigators. All had taken one look at who she was accusing and politely declined the case. But there was a 4th name on her list: a retired NYPD detective who specialized in impossible cases and had a reputation for not caring about politics or power. She started typing an email. "Mr. Castellano, my name is Charlotte Morrison, formerly Charlotte Westfield. You may have heard of my case in the news. I know what the public record says, but I'm writing to tell you that it's a lie." Across town, in a corner office overlooking Central Park, Marcus Westfield poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and stared at the same photograph he'd been staring at for 6 months. It was from their honeymoon in Santorini. Charlotte was laughing, her sundress whipping in the Mediterranean wind, her face tilted toward the sun with pure, unguarded joy. He'd taken the photo on their 3rd day, when they'd hiked up to watch the sunset, and she'd told him she'd never been happier in her life. "I love you, Marcus Westfield," she'd said. "I'm going to make you so happy." And she had. For 4 years, she'd been his refuge from the brutal world of commercial real estate and political maneuvering. She'd been kind where his world was cruel, genuine where everyone else wore masks, loving when he'd forgotten how to recognize real emotion. Then she'd killed their bobbies. Hadn't she? Marcus took a long drink, feeling the burn of the scotch in his throat. He'd been asking himself that question more and more lately. During the day, he maintained the facade: grieving father, betrayed husband, strong man moving forward. But at night, alone with his thoughts and too much alcohol, doubts crept in. Charlotte had loved those bobbies. He'd seen it in the way she'd talked to her belly, the way she'd obsessively read pregnancy books, the way she'd insisted on only organic foods and refused even over-the-counter pain medication for her migraines. That woman didn't drink during pregnancy. She'd barely drunk before pregnancy. But Dr. Ashford's testimony had been so detailed, so clinical, so convincing. Blood tests didn't lie. Maintenance records showed the elevator had been serviced and deemed safe just 3 weeks before the accident. Charlotte had missed appointments. Dr. Ashford had the records. Didn't he? Marcus opened his desk drawer and pulled out the file Gerald Rothstein had prepared for the divorce. He'd read it cover to cover in the immediate aftermath, using his rage and grief as fuel to burn away any sympathy he might have felt. But now, 6 months later, with emotions less raw, he forced himself to read it again slowly, carefully. Dr. Ashford's statement: patient exhibited erratic behavior, missed 2 scheduled appointments, refused recommended bed rest. But Marcus remembered Charlotte's calendar. She'd kept it religiously, color-coded and detailed. Medical appointments were always in blue. He'd seen multiple blue entries in the weeks before the accident, and she'd never mentioned Dr. Ashford recommending bed rest. In fact, she'd shown him articles the doctor had sent about the importance of moderate exercise during high-risk pregnancies. Blood test results: trace amounts of alcohol consistent with recent consumption. The test had been taken while Charlotte was sedated. Marcus knew enough about medical procedures to know that contamination was possible, that labs made errors, that samples could be mixed up. But he'd been so ready to believe the worst. Why? Because Dr. Ashford had been his friend since business school. Because the elevator belonged to his building, and accepting sabotage meant accepting that his company's safety protocols had failed. because blaming Charlotte was easier than facing the alternative. That he'd failed to protect his family. That someone might have deliberately murdered his children. That he destroyed his wife based on lies. Marcus's hand shook as he poured another drink. His phone buzzed with a text from Veronica. "Can't wait for Saturday night, babe. Wear that suit I like." He'd met Veronica at a fundraiser 4 months ago. She was beautiful, uncomplicated, and completely uninterested in anything deeper than which restaurants were trendy and which parties were exclusive. Dating her was easy. She didn't ask questions. She didn't look at him with Charlotte's perceptive eyes that always seemed to see straight through to his soul. She didn't make him feel things. Which was exactly why he couldn't do this anymore. Marcus typed back, "We need to talk, this isn't working." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he opened his laptop and pulled up the private investigator report he'd commissioned 3 months ago. The one he'd told himself was just to be thorough, to quiet the whispers of doubt. The one he'd been too afraid to actually read. Time to face whatever truth was in there. Even if it destroyed him. In the basement security office of Mount Sinai Hospital, Jerome Matthews was working a double shift that should have ended 4 hours ago. The overnight supervisor had called in sick, and Jerome, always reliable, always willing, had volunteered to cover. At 53 years old, with bad knees from 20 years as a transit cop and a daughter at NYU whose tuition wasn't going to pay itself, Jerome couldn't afford to turn down overtime. He was cycling through security footage, marking timestamps for a stolen equipment investigation, when something caught his eye. A clip from 6 months ago. The timestamp read 2:27 p.m., June 18th. Jerome knew that date. Everyone who worked at Mount Sinai knew that date. It was the day Charlotte Westfield had come in after the elevator accident, the day 4 Bobbies had died, the day the society scandal had exploded across every news outlet in the city. But this footage wasn't from the emergency room entrance or the surgical wing. It was from the parking garage, service level B2, near the private elevator that doctors used. And it showed Dr. Richard Ashford in heated conversation with someone Jerome didn't recognize. A man in maintenance coveralls with the logo of Westfield Tower clearly visible on the back. Jerome's finger hovered over the fast-forward button. Then he saw it. The maintenance man handed Dr. Ashford something, an envelope thick enough to contain papers or photographs. Dr. Ashford opened it, glanced inside, and nodded. Then he pulled out his own envelope, much thinner, the kind that might hold a check or cash, and handed it to the maintenance man. An exchange, in a deserted parking garage, less than 24 hours before Charlotte Westfield's elevator would catastrophically fail. "Holy hell," Jerome whispered. He looked around the empty security office. It was 3:47 a.m. No one else would be in for another 2 hours. He pulled out his phone and started recording the screen, capturing the footage of the exchange. His hands were shaking. Jerome had spent 20 years as a cop. He knew what he was looking at. He also knew how dangerous it was. Dr. Richard Ashford wasn't just any physician. He was connected to wealth, to power, to people who could make problems disappear. And if what Jerome suspected was true, if that elevator had been sabotaged and Ashford had been involved. Charlotte Westfield wasn't crazy. She wasn't negligent. She was a victim. And Jerome was holding the first piece of evidence that could prove it. Jerome Matthews had not been a detective during his 20 years with the NYPD, but he'd worked alongside enough of them to understand one fundamental truth. Follow the evidence wherever it leads, no matter who it implicates. The footage from the parking garage was a starting point, not a conclusion. If he was going to blow the whistle on whatever conspiracy had destroyed Charlotte Westfield's life, he needed more than a brief clip of a suspicious exchange. He needed proof that would stand up in court. For 2 weeks, Jerome conducted his own investigation in the margins of his security shifts. He came in early, stayed late, and used his access to the hospital's archive system to pull every second of footage from the day Charlotte Westfield arrived and the week leading up to it. He compiled it onto a series of thumb drives he kept hidden in his work locker, each one meticulously labeled and time-stamped. The patterns he found made his blood run cold. Dr. Ashford appeared in the parking garage footage 3 more times in the 2 weeks before the elevator incident, always meeting with the same maintenance worker. The exchanges were brief but consistent. Envelopes passed, nods exchanged, both men checking over their shoulders before departing in opposite directions. But that was just the beginning. Jerome pulled Charlotte Westfield's medical records, a massive violation of HIPAA regulations, but his conscience told him that some rules were worth breaking when lives hung in the balance. He couldn't access the detailed clinical notes without proper credentials, but he could see the appointment schedule and basic entry logs. According to Dr. Ashford's sworn testimony, Charlotte had missed 2 appointments in the month before the accident, but the entry logs showed her badge had been scanned at the medical building entrance on both of those dates. She'd been there. The appointments had been kept. Someone had altered the official appointment records. Jerome dug deeper, pulling up requisition forms for Charlotte's medications. The standard prenatal vitamins she'd initially been prescribed were common, well established, with decades of safety data. But 3 months into her pregnancy, Dr. Ashford had switched her to a different supplement, one Jerome had never heard of. He researched it during his lunch break on his personal laptop at a coffee shop 6 blocks from the hospital, using a VPN and incognito browsing. What he found made his stomach turn. The supplement was produced by a pharmaceutical company called Meridian Biohealth, a boutique outfit that specialized in customized nutritional therapy for high-risk pregnancies. The company was registered in Delaware, had minimal web presence, and listed only one physician on its medical advisory board, Dr. Richard Ashford. In other words, Ashford was prescribing medications produced by a company he partially owned and potentially profited from. But it got worse. Jerome found 3 malpractice lawsuits buried in court records, all settled out of court with NDAs, all involving patients who'd been prescribed Meridian Biohealth products by Dr. Ashford. 2 involved severe pregnancy complications. 1 involved a stillbirth. This wasn't about Charlotte Westfield specifically. This was about a pattern of medical fraud and malpractice that had been operating for years, hidden behind settlements and sealed records, and the kind of high-powered legal defense that only wealth could buy. And Marcus Westfield's name appeared on Meridian Biohealth's business registration as a minority investor. Jerome's hands shook as he printed out the documents at a FedEx office, paying cash and wearing a baseball cap pulled low. Marcus Westfield had unknowingly bankrolled the company whose products had potentially harmed his own wife and children. The irony was devastating. But the question remained, why the elevator? If the supplements were the real problem, why sabotage the elevator at all? Unless Jerome's detective instincts kicked in. Unless Charlotte had figured something out. Unless she discovered the truth about the supplements and confronted Dr. Ashford. Unless the elevator wasn't meant to kill her, it was meant to silence her, and the pregnancy complications could then be blamed on the accident rather than on the medications. He needed to talk to Charlotte Westfield. Charlotte was hunched over her laptop at 2 in the morning when the email came through. She'd been running on coffee and determination for so long that exhaustion had become her natural state. The private investigator she'd hired, Rafael Castellano, the impossible cases specialist, had delivered his initial findings 3 days ago. They'd been encouraging but not conclusive. Circumstantial evidence of inconsistencies, questions about Dr. Ashford's testimony, but nothing concrete. Then her inbox pinged. Subject, you need to see this. We should meet. J. Matthews, Mount Sinai Security. Charlotte's heart began to pound. She clicked the email open. Mrs. Morrison, I'll use your current name. You don't know me, but I work security at Mount Sinai Hospital. I've been reviewing footage from the day of your accident, and I've found something. I have evidence that suggests Dr. Ashford was involved in something criminal related to your case. I need to meet with you in person. This is too sensitive to discuss over email. I'm risking my job and potentially my safety by reaching out. If you're interested in knowing the truth about what really happened, meet me at the New Wing Coffee Shop on Amsterdam Avenue, Thursday at 3 p.m. Come alone. I'll be wearing a Mets cap. Jerome. Charlotte read the email 5 times, her mind racing between hope and suspicion. It could be a trap. Marcus's lawyers could be testing her, looking for evidence that she was still obsessed with the case. It could be a reporter seeking an exclusive, or a scammer looking to exploit her vulnerability. But what if it was real? She typed back, "I'll be there. How do I know I can trust you?" The response came within minutes. "You can't, but I'm betting you're desperate enough to take the chance. I've attached a single screenshot from footage you've never seen. If you want the rest, meet me Thursday." Charlotte opened the attachment. It was grainy, timestamped 2:27 p.m. on June 18th of last year. Dr. Richard Ashford stood in what appeared to be a parking garage, his distinctive silver hair and patrician features unmistakable even in low resolution. He was accepting an envelope from a man in Westfield Tower maintenance coveralls. The day before her elevator fell. Charlotte's vision blurred with tears. This was it. This was the crack in the wall she'd been throwing herself against for 6 months. She typed, "I'll be there." Thursday afternoon, Charlotte arrived at New Wing Coffee Shop 45 minutes early. She dressed in nondescript jeans and a hoodie, pulled her hair back into a ponytail, and worn sunglasses despite the overcast sky. The last thing she needed was to be recognized and photographed meeting with some mysterious source. She ordered a black coffee and sat in the back corner where she could watch the door. Her phone was in her pocket, 911 pre-dialed and ready. Rafael Castellano, her PI, knew where she was and had instructions to call the police if she didn't check in by 4 p.m. At exactly 3 o'clock, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his 50s walked in wearing a Mets cap and a hospital security uniform under his winter jacket. His eyes swept the coffee shop with practiced efficiency before landing on Charlotte. He gave a small nod and approached her table. "Mrs. Morrison." "Mr. Matthews." "Just Jerome." He sat down across from her, pulling a large manila envelope from inside his jacket. "Thank you for coming. I know this must feel crazy." "My life has been crazy for 6 months. This is just another Thursday." Charlotte tried to keep her voice steady. "You said you have evidence." Jerome glanced around the coffee shop, ensuring no one was paying attention to them. Then he pulled a thumb drive from his pocket and set it on the table between them. "Everything I'm about to show you I obtained through, let's call them ethically questionable means. If this goes to court, some of it might not be admissible, but it's true." He pushed the drive toward her. "I've compiled footage showing Dr. Ashford meeting with a Westfield Tower maintenance worker 4 times in the 2 weeks before your accident. They're exchanging envelopes. Cash for documents would be my guess, though I can't prove what's inside." Charlotte's hands trembled as she picked up the drive. "There's more," Jerome continued. "Your appointment records were altered. You didn't miss those appointments. I have entry logs showing your badge scan on both dates. Someone went into the system and changed the official records after the fact." "Oh my God," the words came out as a whisper. "And the supplements." Jerome pulled out a folder of printed documents. "The prenatal vitamins Dr. Ashford prescribed. They're from a company he partially owns. A company that's been sued multiple times for pregnancy complications. One of those lawsuits involved a stillbirth, all settled with NDAs." Charlotte felt like the walls of the coffee shop were closing in. "He poisoned me. He poisoned my bobbies. I think he was committing medical fraud, yes, but I don't think he meant to kill the children." Jerome's voice was gentle but firm. "I think you found out something, or he thought you did, and he needed to silence you before you could expose his operation." "The elevator." "The elevator. I've got footage of him meeting with that maintenance worker right before it failed. That's not coincidence." Jerome leaned forward. "Mrs. Morrison, Charlotte, I think Dr. Richard Ashford sabotaged the elevator to get rid of you, and when the Bobbies died as a result, he used it to paint you as the villain. He created a narrative where you were the unstable, negligent mother, which both discredited you and made him look like the hero doctor who tried to save you despite your recklessness." The coffee shop blurred as tears streamed down Charlotte's face. For 6 months she'd been called a murderer, a drunk, a negligent mother who'd killed her own children, and all along she'd been telling the truth. She'd been the victim. "Why are you helping me?" she asked when she could speak again. "You don't know me. You're risking your job, possibly your life." Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out his wallet and showed her a photo, a young woman in graduation robes beaming at the camera. "My daughter, Angela, she's at NYU studying pre-med, wants to be an ob-gyn." He put the wallet away. When I saw that footage, I thought about what kind of world I want her to practice medicine in. One where doctors like Ashford can get away with murdering bobbies for profit. No, not on my watch. Charlotte wiped her eyes. What do we do now? Now, Jerome slid the rest of the documents across the table. Now we take this to someone who can actually do something about it. I've already reached out to an investigative reporter at the New York Times who specializes in medical fraud. Her name is Diana Wu. She's won a Pulitzer, and she's interested. The media destroyed me once. Why would they help me now? Because the first story was a lie and real journalists hate being lied to. Jerome stood up. Diana wants to meet with you. I've already sent her preliminary evidence. If we can get this published, if we can get the public to see what really happened, then we can force the DA's office to reopen the case, maybe even get criminal charges filed. Charlotte stood as well, clutching the thumb drive and documents like they were life preservers. What about Marcus? Does he know? Jerome's expression became complicated. I don't know what Marcus Westfield knows, but here's what I've learned about powerful men. Sometimes they're willfully blind because the truth is inconvenient. Your husband invested in Meridian Biohealth. He's friends with Dr. Ashford. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't. But he's going to have to answer for it either way. Diana Wu was not what Charlotte expected. The Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist was barely 30. With sharp eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses and a rapid-fire way of speaking that suggested her brain was always 3 steps ahead of the conversation. They met in Diana's office at the New York Times building, a cluttered space filled with file boxes, coffee cups, and post-it notes covering every available surface. Jerome had come along, bringing additional copies of all his evidence. Mrs. Morrison, may I call you Charlotte? Diana didn't wait for an answer. I've reviewed everything Jerome sent over. This is massive. Not just the elevator sabotage, which is attempted murder, but the entire medical fraud operation. I've been investigating Meridian Biohealth for 18 months on a different angle, pharmaceutical kickbacks. I didn't know they were also actively harming patients. How many others? Charlotte asked, her voice hollow. How many other women did he hurt? At least 15 that I can document, probably more. Most settled with NDAs. Most were too intimidated or traumatized to speak out. Diana pulled up a spreadsheet on her computer. Dr. Ashford has been running this scheme for at least 7 years. He prescribes Meridian products, gets kickbacks, and when complications arise, he settles out of court with money from Westfield Corporation, which, by the way, your ex-husband controls. Marcus knew. That's what I need to find out. Diana fixed Charlotte with an intense stare. I need you to be completely honest with me. Before the accident, did you ever express concerns to your husband about Dr. Ashford or the supplements? Charlotte thought back, her mind sifting through memories that had been buried under months of trauma. Yes. Actually, yes. About a week before the accident, I'd been feeling off. Not just normal pregnancy tiredness, but something else. Headaches, nausea beyond morning sickness, weird muscle twitches. I told Marcus I wanted a second opinion, maybe switch doctors. What did he say? He said Dr. Ashford was the best, that it was just the stress of carrying quadruplets, that I was being paranoid. Charlotte's eyes widened. Oh my God, I remember now. Dr. Ashford called the house that night. They talked in Marcus's office for over an hour. The next day, Marcus gave me this big speech about trusting the process, about how high-risk pregnancies were scary, but Ashford knew what he was doing. Diana and Jerome exchanged glances. Charlotte, Diana said carefully, I need to ask you something difficult. Is it possible your husband knew more than he let on? Is it possible he was protecting his investment in Meridian Biohealth, even if it meant dismissing your concerns? The thought was like a knife twisting in Charlotte's chest. I don't know, I don't want to believe, she stopped. But he was so quick to believe I was responsible. He didn't even question Dr. Ashford's story. He just accepted it. Accepted it or needed it to be true, Jerome said quietly. Because if you were at fault, then he wasn't. Then he hadn't ignored his pregnant wife's concerns to protect a business investment. Then he wasn't complicit. Charlotte felt sick. What do we do? We publish, Diana said. I've got enough for a preliminary story right now. Prominent Park Avenue doctor investigated for medical fraud. That'll force the authorities to act. Then we follow up with the elevator sabotage, the cover-up, everything. By the time we're done, Dr. Richard Ashford will be facing criminal charges, and everyone who helped him, including anyone who looked the other way, will have to answer for it. How long? Charlotte asked. 48 hours until the first story runs. After that, Diana smiled grimly. After that, we watch the dominoes fall. Marcus Westfield was in a board meeting when his phone started blowing up. Text after text, call after call, all from his PR team, his lawyers, his corporate officers. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway, a sense of dread building in his chest. The email from Gerald Rothstein, his lawyer, had a subject line that made his blood run cold. Urgent. NYT about to publish Ashford investigation. Marcus opened the attachment, an advance copy of Diana Wu's article, obtained through a source at the Times. The headline, Park Avenue Doctor's Medical Fraud Scheme, How Dr. Richard Ashford Endangered Pregnant Women for Profit. Marcus read the first 3 paragraphs and had to lean against the wall. The article detailed Meridian Biohealth, the kickback scheme, the 15 documented victims, the out-of-court settlements paid by Westfield Corporation. It named Marcus as a minority investor. It included testimony from Charlotte about her symptoms and concerns. It mentioned the altered medical records. And it ended with a bombshell. Sources close to the investigation indicate that the elevator malfunction that killed Charlotte Westfield's 4 unborn children may not have been an accident. Security footage obtained by the New York Times shows Dr. Ashford meeting with a Westfield Tower maintenance worker the day before the incident. Police are now investigating whether the elevator was deliberately sabotaged to silence Mrs. Westfield, who may have discovered Dr. Ashford's fraud scheme. Marcus's phone rang. Gerald Rothstein. Tell me this isn't true, Marcus said by way of greeting. Which part? The part where your friend and business partner has been running a medical fraud scheme for 7 years, or the part where he may have murdered your children to cover it up? Gerald's voice was sharp. Marcus, we need to talk. Now, not over the phone. My office, 20 minutes. Marcus ended the call and stood in the empty hallway of his corporate headquarters, the building that bore his name, the empire he'd built through ruthless determination and unwavering focus. And for the first time in his adult life, he felt completely lost. Because if this was true, if even half of it was true, then he destroyed Charlotte for nothing. He'd blamed her for an accident that was actually murder. He'd called her a killer when she'd been trying to protect their bobbies. He'd been so desperate to avoid his own guilt that he'd built an entire narrative around her negligence, never questioning, never investigating, never giving her the benefit of the doubt she deserved. And 4 innocent lives had been lost because he'd trusted the wrong man. Marcus pulled up Charlotte's contact on his phone. He deleted it 6 months ago in a fit of rage, but his assistant had saved a backup. His finger hovered over the call button. What could he possibly say? How could he possibly make this right? He couldn't. But he had to try. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. Her voice, when it came, was cautious and cold. Hello. Charlotte, his voice broke on her name. Charlotte, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. There was a long silence. Then, you're reading the article. I just got the advance copy. I didn't know. You have to believe me, I didn't know. You didn't want to know, she corrected, and her words cut deeper than any scream could have. I told you I was worried. I told you something felt wrong, and you chose to believe Dr. Ashford instead of me. I know, God, Charlotte, I know. I was so stupid, so blind. 4 Bobbies are dead because you were blind, Marcus. 4 children will never meet, never hold, never watch grow up. Because you invested in a company you didn't research, trusted a man you shouldn't have, and when I tried to tell you something was wrong, you dismissed me. Tears streamed down Marcus's face. People were passing in the hallway, staring at him, but he didn't care. What can I do? Tell me what I can do to make this right. There is no making this right. Charlotte's voice was steady, but he could hear the pain beneath it. But if you want to do something useful, use your power, use your resources. Help me destroy the man who killed our children. Help me make sure he never hurts another family. Can you do that? Yes, Marcus said immediately. Yes, whatever you need. Then I'll see you in court, Marcus. When Dr. Richard Ashford stands trial for murder, I want you there. I want you to look at him and know what your friend really is." She hung up. Marcus stood in the hallway, his empire crumbling around him, and finally let himself grieve. Not just for his children, but for the woman he'd betrayed, the marriage he'd destroyed, and the man he'd revealed himself to be when it mattered most. The New York Times article hit like a bomb. Within 6 hours of publication, Dr. Richard Ashford's medical license was suspended pending investigation. Within 24 hours, the Manhattan District Attorney announced a criminal probe into both the medical fraud scheme and the elevator incident. Within 48 hours, federal investigators from the FDA and FBI joined the case, expanding the investigation to Meridian BioHealth's entire operation. And within 72 hours, the court of public opinion reversed completely. The same social media that had crucified Charlotte now erupted with hashtags, "Justice for Charlotte Westfield, Bobby's Ashford must pay." Think pieces flooded every major publication, dissecting how a wealthy white male doctor had manipulated the system to victimize women and escape accountability. Charlotte's old friends, the ones who'd abandoned her 6 months ago, suddenly wanted to reconnect, offering hollow apologies and transparent attempts to attach themselves to her vindication. She ignored most of them. Charlotte sat in Diana Wu's office, watching the feeding frenzy with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. Jerome was there too, having taken a leave of absence from the hospital after administrators tried to fire him for his unauthorized access to records and footage. Diana's publication had immediately hired him as a security consultant and paid his legal fees. Sometimes the good guys won. "The DA wants to meet with you tomorrow," Diana said, scrolling through emails on her phone. "They're building a case for second-degree murder, depraved indifference resulting in death. The elevator sabotage caused 4 deaths. That's multiple counts." "Will it stick?" Charlotte asked. "He has expensive lawyers." "They have Jerome's footage, the maintenance worker who flipped on Ashford to save himself, the toxicology reports showing problematic compounds in the supplements, and 15 other victims ready to testify." Diana looked up, her eyes fierce. "It'll stick. Ashford is going to prison." "Good." Charlotte felt the word resonate in her chest, not satisfaction exactly. The Bobbies were still gone, the trauma was still there, but justice, real, tangible justice, was finally within reach. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rafael Castellano, the PI. "Heads up, Marcus is outside Diana's building. Says he needs to talk to you. Your call if you want me to send him away." Charlotte's stomach tightened. She'd avoided Marcus since their phone conversation 3 days ago. She'd seen the statement his lawyers released, denouncing Dr. Ashford and promising full cooperation with authorities. She'd seen him photographed leaving his lawyer's office looking haggard and defeated. The tabloids were having a field day with his downfall, betrayed by his friend, complicit in his children's deaths, the once mighty billionaire brought low. Part of her wanted him to suffer. Part of her wanted him to feel a fraction of the pain she'd endured. But another part, the part that had loved him for 4 years, that had said vows before God and family, that had dreamed of raising Bobbies with him, that part still ached when she thought about what they'd lost. Not just the children, but each other. "Let him up," Charlotte said quietly. Diana and Jerome exchanged glances but didn't argue. They gathered their materials and stepped out of the office, giving Charlotte privacy. Diana paused at the door. "We'll be right outside if you need us." Marcus appeared 5 minutes later. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 6 months. His usual impeccable grooming had slipped. His hair needed cutting. His suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and crushing guilt. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Sit down, Marcus. You look like you're about to collapse." He sat in the chair across from Diana's desk, where Charlotte had positioned herself. The power dynamic had shifted completely. She was no longer the broken woman in a hospital bed or the exiled ex-wife hiding in a studio apartment. She was the survivor, the truth-teller, the woman who'd been vindicated against impossible odds. "I've read everything," Marcus began. "Every article, every piece of evidence, Jerome's testimony, the victim's statements. I've been meeting with prosecutors, providing financial records for Meridian BioHealth, cooperating fully. I want you to know that." "I appreciate it," Charlotte said carefully. But I also need you to know how sorry I am. Marcus's voice cracked. Not just for what happened with Ashford, but for what I did to you. I was your husband. I was supposed to protect you, believe you, stand by you. Instead, I became your worst enemy. I destroyed you when you needed me most. I called you a killer when you were grieving. He stopped, unable to continue. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes but forced them back. She'd cried enough. Why, Marcus? Why were you so quick to believe him instead of me? He was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Because if it was your fault, then it wasn't mine. Because I dismissed your concerns about the supplements. I told you to trust Ashford when you wanted a second opinion. I'd invested in Meridian without doing proper due diligence because Ashford was my friend and I trusted him. If the Bobbies died because of the elevator, because of you being reckless, then I could be the grieving father instead of the guilty one. I needed you to be the villain because I couldn't face being complicit. So you threw me away to protect yourself. Yes, the word was raw with shame. I threw you away, I destroyed your reputation, I let you suffer alone, and I will regret it every single day for the rest of my life. Charlotte stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there was the Westfield Tower, the building where her Bobbies had died. Somewhere out there was the hospital where they'd been pronounced dead, where her life had shattered. Somewhere out there was the truth she'd fought 6 months to uncover. I don't forgive you, she said finally. I'm not sure I ever will. You didn't just fail me in a moment of weakness. You systematically destroyed me. You used your power, your wealth, your lawyers to paint me as unstable and negligent. You made the world hate me. You made me doubt my own sanity. I know. But I also understand why you did it. Not excuse it, but understand it. You're human. You made terrible choices because you couldn't handle the guilt, and you'll have to live with that. Marcus stood as well, maintaining distance. What happens now? Now, Charlotte turned to face him. Now we both move forward, separately. The divorce will stand. I don't want your money or your name, Marcus. I never did. But we're going to see each other in court when Ashford goes to trial. We're going to share the pain of testifying about the children we lost. We're going to have to face what happened together, even if we can't be together. I'll be there, Marcus promised. I'll testify. I'll do whatever helps put him away. That's all I ask. Charlotte moved toward the door. You should go. I have a meeting with the DA in an hour and I need to prepare. Marcus followed her to the door but paused before leaving. Charlotte, for whatever it's worth, I did love you. I do love you. I just didn't love you better than I loved protecting myself. And that's something I'll never forgive myself for. I loved you too, Charlotte said softly. But love without trust, without belief, without standing together when it matters most, that's not enough. We both deserve better than what we became. He nodded, tears streaming down his face, and left without another word. Charlotte closed the door and leaned against it, allowing herself exactly 2 minutes to grieve the marriage that might have been. Then she wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and returned to Diana's desk. There was work to do, justice to pursue, a story to finish. The trial of Dr. Richard Ashford began on a cold February morning, 8 months after the elevator incident. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims, legal observers, and sitting in the front row on opposite sides of the aisle, Charlotte Morrison and Marcus Westfield. The prosecution's case was devastating. Jerome's footage played on large screens, showing the clandestine meetings between Ashford and the maintenance worker. The maintenance worker himself testified, describing how Ashford had paid him $10,000 to tamper with the elevator's brake system, promising it would be a minor malfunction, nothing serious. Toxicology experts detailed how the Meridian supplements contained compounds known to cause pregnancy complications. Medical experts testified that Charlotte's symptoms before the accident were consistent with poisoning. 15 other victims took the stand, each telling stories of complications, miscarriages, and near-death experiences after taking Ashford's prescribed medications. Their testimony painted a picture of a doctor who viewed patients as profit centers rather than human beings, who systematically endangered women to line his pockets. And then Charlotte testified. She walked to the stand with her head high, wearing a simple navy suit that conveyed dignity and strength. She'd rehearsed her testimony with the prosecutors dozens of times, but nothing could truly prepare her for this moment. "Mrs. Morrison," the assistant district attorney began gently, "can you describe the events of June 19th of last year?" Charlotte took a breath and began. She described her pregnancy, her excitement, her love for her unborn children. She described her concerns about the supplements, Marcus dismissing them, Ashford's reassurances. She described the elevator beginning to fall, the terror, the impact, waking up empty. She described Marcus's accusations, the exile, the months of public vilification. Her voice never wavered. She cried all her tears. Now there was only truth. "Mrs. Morrison," the Ada said, "do you believe Dr. Ashford deliberately caused the deaths of your 4 children?" "I don't believe it," Charlotte said clearly. "I know it. He poisoned me with his medications. When I started asking questions, he had my elevator sabotaged to silence me. He murdered my bobbies and then turned me into the villain to cover his crimes. But I'm not the villain. I'm a mother who will never hold her children, and he's a murderer who belongs in prison." She looked directly at Ashford as she spoke. The doctor sat at the defense table, his expensive suit and silver hair impeccable, his face an emotionless mask. But she saw it, just for a moment, a flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew he was finished. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty of second-degree murder, 4 counts. Attempted murder, medical fraud, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to tamper with public safety equipment. Dr. Richard Ashford was sentenced to consecutive terms totaling 60 years to life. At 67 years old, he would die in prison. As the judge read the sentence, Charlotte felt Marcus's presence beside her. They'd somehow gravitated toward each other in the moment of verdict, standing side by side for the first time in 8 months. His hand found hers, and she didn't pull away. "For Emma," she whispered. "For Lucas, Sophie, and James." "For our bobbies," Marcus agreed, his voice thick with emotion. They stood together, 2 broken people united in grief and vindication, watching as the man who destroyed their family was led away in handcuffs. It wasn't closure. There was no such thing when 4 innocent lives had been lost. But it was justice. And sometimes, justice was all you could hope for. 6 months later, Charlotte stood at the unveiling of the Emma, Lucas, Sophie, and James Westfield Memorial Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to investigating medical malpractice and supporting victims of pregnancy-related medical fraud. The foundation's board included Diana Wu, Jerome Matthews, and 5 of the other victims from Ashford's schemes. Marcus had funded it with $10 million from the liquidation of Meridian Biohealth. Every penny of profit the company had ever made, returned to help the people it had harmed. "We can't bring back the bobbies we lost," Charlotte said into the microphone, addressing the crowd of donors, supporters, and media. "But we can make sure their deaths meant something. We can protect other mothers, other families, from predators who hide behind medical degrees and expensive suits. We can demand accountability. We can tell the truth, no matter how powerful the people who benefit from lies." The crowd applauded. Jerome stood off to the side, his arm around his daughter Angela, who'd just been accepted to medical school. Diana was taking notes for a follow-up article. And Marcus stood in the back, watching Charlotte with an expression of profound regret and admiration. They weren't together. They probably never would be. The betrayal had cut too deep, broken something fundamental that couldn't be repaired. But they'd found a way to honor their children together, to transform tragedy into purpose, to ensure that 4 tiny lives that never drew breath would still change the world. After the ceremony, Charlotte found Marcus by the memorial wall, where photos of the Bobbies' ultrasounds were displayed alongside those of other victims. "It's a good thing you're doing," he said. "They would be proud." "We're doing," Charlotte corrected. "I couldn't have made this happen without your resources." "It's the least I could do, the absolute least." He paused. "Charlotte, I know I have no right to ask, but do you think someday you might be able to forgive me? Not now, maybe not for years, but someday." Charlotte considered the question carefully. "I don't know, Marcus. What you did caused so much damage, but I also know that you're trying to make amends. You've spent the last year cooperating with every investigation, helping other victims, funding this foundation. You're facing what you did instead of running from it. That counts for something. But not enough. Maybe not yet, But time changes things. Who knows what the future holds? She managed a small smile. For now, let's just focus on making sure Ashford's victims get the help they need and that this never happens to another family. I can do that, Marcus said. I will do that. They parted ways, two people forever connected by the worst tragedy of their lives, working together despite everything to create something meaningful from unimaginable loss. Charlotte drove back to her apartment, a nicer one now, in a better neighborhood, funded by a book deal for her memoir and speaking fees from her advocacy work. She was no longer Charlotte Westfield or even Charlotte Morrison. She was simply Charlotte, a woman who'd survived the unsurvivable, who'd fought for truth when the entire world called her a liar, who transformed victimhood into power. She thought about her Bobbies every day. She always would. But now when she thought of them, she also thought of the lives being saved by the foundation, the doctors being held accountable, the women who would never suffer what she'd suffered because of the work she was doing. Her children would never grow up, but their legacy would. And in the end, that was the only justice she could give them. What would you have done in Charlotte's position? When the entire world turns against you, when your own husband becomes your accuser, when every institution fails you, would you have had the strength to keep fighting? To search for truth even when it seemed impossible? Charlotte Westfield lost everything. Her Bobbies, her marriage, her home, her reputation. For 6 months, she was America's most hated mother, blamed for a tragedy that was actually a crime. But she never stopped believing in the truth. And that refusal to give up, that determination to expose the person who really murdered her children, that's what changed everything. This story reminds us that justice can prevail, even when it seems impossible. That one person with courage and persistence can take down powerful criminals who think they're untouchable. That the truth matters, even when lies are more convenient. Dr. Richard Ashford had wealth, connections, and a perfect reputation. He thought he could get away with murder. But he didn't count on a mother's love, a security guard's conscience, and a journalist's determination to expose corruption. If this story made your blood boil, if it restored your faith that sometimes the good guys win, if you believe that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, should be above the law, then I need you to do something right now. Smash that like button if you believe Charlotte deserved justice. Comment, Justice SERVED, if you think Dr. Ashford got exactly what he deserved. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another story of people fighting back against corruption, injustice, and abuse of power. We're building a community here of people who refuse to accept that wealth and power equal immunity. People who believe victims deserve to be heard. People who know that sometimes the truth takes time, but it always matters. Drop a comment telling me, have you or someone you know ever been failed by someone who was supposed to help? Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? Share your story. You're not alone, and this community has your back. And if you want more stories like this, stories about justice prevailing, truth winning, and victims becoming survivors, then check out the playlist I've linked in the description. These are stories about people who refused to quit, who fought back when everyone told them to give up, who proved that one person with courage can change everything. Hit that subscribe button and join this community fighting for what's right. Because Charlotte's story proves that no matter how dark things get, no matter how powerful your enemies are, the truth has a way of coming to light. And when it does, justice follows. Let's make sure that everyone who needs to hear Charlotte's story hears it. Share this video. Tag someone who needs to know that it's always worth fighting for the truth. And remember, you are not alone. We fight together, justice together. We stand together. Now tell me in the comments, what part of Charlotte's story hit you the hardest? Was it the betrayal, the fight for vindication, the moment justice was finally served? I read every comment, and your stories inspire the next videos I make. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for believing in justice. And thank you for standing with survivors like Charlotte who refuse to let the powerful win. See you in the next one. Until then, keep fighting, keep believing, keep demanding truth. Like, comment, subscribe. Let's do this together.